This week on the Destination Angler.
If you don't strip set, you're going to lose 95% of the fish that eat your fly. You always point your fly rod at the fly as you're stripping. And you're kind of like in that shortstop, catcher, ready stance, because when that fish eats, you need to strip set at least twice. Just too good, like a tug of war, like just strip, strip, strip.
Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haigh. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa.
You can join in the conversation with our new Facebook group called the Destination Angler Connection. Please check that out when you get a moment or two. And please follow us on Instagram at the Destination Angler Podcast. Hey, if you've had a quality experience with a guide and think you'd be a great guest for the show, please drop me a line. Today, our destination is Northwestern Connecticut and the famous Housatonic River. And our guest is expert guide, speaker, and big game fish on the fly expert, Stephen Pogodzienski, or Pogo for short. Most anglers think of the Housatonic as a great place to wet a line for trout, and that's true. However, today we're going to rock your world with tales of stalking Northern Pike on the fly on this gorgeous stream in the Northeast. A little bit about Pogo. He grew up in Northern Connecticut and attended Iona College in New York. He has a passion for fly angling for large predator fish such as Muskie and Pike and holds a world record for walleye on the fly. He's won several muskie tournaments, including the Fly Fishing Muskie World Championship in Hayward, Wisconsin, and he's passionate about teaching, and his YouTube channel is chock full of great how-to videos on pike and muskie setups and techniques for fly fishing. So if you're looking for something new and exciting, listen while Pogo takes us into the mind of Northern Pike and gives us the lowdown on how to take them on the fly. Pogo, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, Stephen, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I got to start off by asking you, so tell us about that world record walleye, man. That's pretty amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, there's obviously a story behind it. When I first got really into pike on the fly, I then learned of muskie really quickly, and I went out to the Hayward, Wisconsin area, and I hired a guy named Brad Bowen, who's kind of like the godfather of muskie on the fly, and went out there and for two and a half days, and it was the first day we were floating the Flambeau River, which is like a world famous muskie fishery out there in northern Wisconsin. And one of my favorite places on earth now that I've been out there for the last 7 years. But we were muskie fishing, and I had a 10 weight with about a 14-inch muskie fly, articulated muskie fly. And we were going through one section of the river, and he's like, yeah, this section is kind of slow for muskies. I'm going to kind of push through, but if you want to cast on either side, feel free. So I cast it out to my right and stripping in, and I hooked the fish. And we both thought it was a muskie. It got close to his drift boat, and I kind of went over the bow of the boat with the fish. I said, "Do you have big largemouth in here?" He's like, "No." He's like, "You probably got a walleye," because I was never been at this point. I was never in northern Wisconsin, and out there, walleye is like a religion. And so I get the walleye close to the boat. He nets it, gets it in the boat, and he looks at me. He's like, Pogo, he's like, "I've been doing this for 12 years at this point. This is the biggest walleye I've ever had in my boat. We're going to measure this, and we're going to submit this."
That's great.
A world record on the fly for the Fly Fishing Hall of Fame there in Hayward, Wisconsin. And sure enough, it ended up being a world record on the fly and for that particular fly fishing organization in Wisconsin.
Wow. So how big was it?
It was 32 and a half inches by 16 and a half inch girth. Yeah. Yeah. And there's bigger walleyes to be caught in the world, but on the fly, a wild fish in a river like that, a big wild river, I guess it was pretty special. And I made some of the locals very jealous, apparently.
Especially if it was your first time out there. Yeah, that's always how it is though, right? The first time is you get the big fish.
So a little bit of luck.
Yeah. So you got your name on a plaque in the Fly Fishing Hall of Fame, huh?
Yeah, somewhere over there. It's in the book every year. I check the book that comes out every year to see if it's been broken. So far, it hasn't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good for you. All right. So now you are back in Connecticut. You're focused on fly fishing for big game fish like pike and muskie. So what is it that gets you so excited about these fish, and why take them on the fly?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And You know, I kind of tell the story around my first pike experience when I didn't even know really what a Northern Pike was. I read about them. I saw pictures of them before, but never really hunted them. Didn't know they were in my local waters. And I was smallmouth fishing and with a topwater popper. And all of a sudden, this monster pike comes out of nowhere and just explodes on it. Of course, I missed it, but it gave me goosebumps. And I started asking some local people, and there wasn't, back then, there wasn't a lot on YouTube. There wasn't a lot on the internet as far as people catching them on the fly. Yeah, just the way they eat, the way they attack your fly, just the fact that, you know, it's the closest thing I think you'll get to a dinosaur in today's day and age.
Yeah.
You know, a 30 or 40-inch pike is probably 15 to 18 years old. They've eaten a lot of meat to get to that point. So it's really hunting. You're really hunting them. And the fact that they can eat 1/3 their body length and be full for a couple days or a week, and, you know, just to get one to eat your fly. And most of the experience with fly fishing for pike and muskie, it's more visual. They fight well, but it's not anything like a saltwater fish or a steelhead. You know, they definitely, you know, it's like wrangling them when you hook them, but a lot of it's visual because they're just such predatory animals, and they just come out of nowhere and inhale your fly, and it's very exhilarating. So that got me hooked right away.
Oh, that's cool. So visual as in sight casting to them, or visual like you see the hit, or both?
Mostly seeing the hit, because obviously we're like, you know, with pike and muskie, you know, you can cast anywhere from a 6 to a 18-inch fly. So if you're in anywhere from 3 feet to 8 feet of water, you know, most of the times you can see your fly. And then there's the whole technique, which is on my YouTube channel, around how to figure eight and the importance of figure eighting next to the boat, because they're very curious animals, and you have to kind of talk them into eating, so to speak, or, you know, kind of convince them to eat as that fly is kind of going away from them. You're playing a cat and mouse. So a lot of the eats are visual. And, you know, I have clients sometimes that their first pike experience on the fly, they just look at me, whether they landed or not, and they're like, that's not what I expected, Pogo. That was just amazing. Just to see such a big fish just come out of nowhere, out of the depths or behind it, and just show up.
Oh, my gosh.
Because a pike and muskie go from 0 to 20 miles an hour in 10 feet. So they can explode out of nowhere, and they're big fish. So that's the exhilarating part.
Yeah. How big do the fish get there in the Housatonic? What's your biggest?
Yeah, so my personal biggest is 43 inches, 43 inches pike.
Really?
Yep. I would say average size is between 26 and 30, 32. So, you know, with pike, the holy grail is kind of 40 inches or better on the fly. And for muskie, you know, if you get in the 50 inch or better club, that's kind of like the fish of a lifetime, so to speak.
Yeah. Right. Okay. No, that's a good sized fish. All right, so let's talk about Northwestern Connecticut. So that's the area you fish in. And so what are the fishing opportunities in your part of the world?
Yeah, no, it's a plethora of opportunities up here in Northern Connecticut and Western Massachusetts, and even all the way down to Southern Connecticut, where the Housatonic River starts up near Pittsfield, Massachusetts, is the headwaters. And it's kind of skinny up there where, you know, it could be anywhere from 10 yards to 30 yards wide and windy through the woods and, you know, farms and cornfields.
Okay.
And then eventually it dumps into the Long Island Sound down near Milford, Connecticut and Stratford, Connecticut. And there's a dam called the Derby Dam in Southern Connecticut, where that's the last dam before the saltwater. And, you know, you can catch striped bass and bluefish on the fly down there. And then as you work, and there's pike actually mixed in there above where the brackish water stops. And then all the way up through Connecticut to northwestern Massachusetts, it's just loaded with smallmouth sections, pike sections, carp on the fly sections, and also some really, really good classic freestone trout water. So, you know, and then we have a handful of lakes in the northern Connecticut that are pike fisheries that the state stocks as well. But my favorite is obviously river fishing and doing it here on the Housatonic, you know, all the way from northern Mass all the way down to, you know, Southern Connecticut. It's just loaded with all different types of species, and it's a really cool fishery.
Okay. Where are you going for muskie?
So most of the muskie adventures, unfortunately, this year I would typically be in Wisconsin right now for 6 weeks guiding and fishing with friends. But with COVID, I didn't go this year, obviously. But yeah, so my number one spot, obviously, in the fall is Wisconsin in the Hayward area. And then here in the Northeast, we have muskies on the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania and, northern Pennsylvania all the way down to southern Pennsylvania, or central Pennsylvania, I should say, and upstate New York. There's the Susquehanna River. And then obviously, which is about a 5-hour drive for me, is the St. Lawrence on the U.S.-Canadian border. And the St. Lawrence is that, that's another amazing, big muskie spot, but it's big water. So you need a big boat, and you need a good sized boat. You need to be able to cast all day, but
no waiting up there.
Yeah, there's no waiting up there. No, unfortunately. But the closest to me is about 3 hours on the Susquehanna River. There's some amazing muskie fishing there, and obviously my favorite time of the year is the fall. So I'll be heading out there a bunch over the next couple of months.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, how big is the river where you are? Like, what are flows, throughout the year?
Yeah, it all depends on the section, and there's obviously a handful of gauges from northern Massachusetts all the way down to southern Connecticut. And, as you go down river towards the Long Island Sound, the flow gets bigger and bigger, obviously. But like in northern Massachusetts, like an average flow would be about 300 CFS. As you start to get into Connecticut, it's about 1,000 CFS. And then as you get to like more central Connecticut, it's a couple thousand CFS. And then obviously when you get down more closer to the Long Island Sound, it's a big part of the river. But I would say the pike sections are anywhere from 300 to 1,000 CFS.
Okay. So can you give us, like, geography wise, like pike sections start like at what town or whatever, and like where is the pike section, would you say?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. I do a handful of presentations a year for Trout Unlimited chapters and some local fishing clubs. And here in 2020, unfortunately, I had to do a few over Zoom, which was interesting. But yeah, there's pike literally loaded from northern Massachusetts all the way down to just before the Long Island Sound.
Wow.
Yeah, they're in every town. And there's one of my favorites. It's called Lake Lillinola. It's the Housatonic River, about half hour south of me, flows into a dam section called Lake Lillinola, which it turns into a bigger body of water where it's maybe like 100 yards across and, varies from 5 feet to 30 feet deep. And that section has a lot of public access. There's a state boat launch there, and I think it's Bridgewater, Connecticut.
Okay.
There's not really many spots to fish by foot unless you have a spin rod, unfortunately. And that's the thing with the pike sections on these rivers. There's not a lot of foot access because you're typically fishing anywhere from 6 to 10, 12 feet deep. And a lot of it's like kind of cuts through the forest and through the woods and through cornfields. So there's a lot of steep banks.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the other thing that's cool about Lake Lillinola here in Connecticut is, which is part of the Housatonic River system, even though it's called Lake Lillinola, the state recently, like 3 or 4 years ago, started putting tiger muskies in. So you obviously have a chance for the state record. The Connecticut pike state record in the 80s came out of Lake Lillinola, and they just started putting muskies in there, tiger muskies in there 3 years ago. Now there's reports of people catching 30, 35-inch tigers, which is
really
kind of a special thing. Yeah. And I wish they would put them in more of the river sections, but they're kind of trying it out.
Help me out here.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if your audience knows, but part of my presentation is I do talk about what a tiger muskie is. And are you aware of what a tiger muskie is, Steve?
Yeah, let's hear it. Yeah, give it to us.
Yeah, so a tiger is a cross between a pike and a muskie. And tigers are sterile. And tigers do happen naturally in the wild. We always catch a couple tigers every fall in Wisconsin in some really, really pristine, epic, natural waters, or, where they're not stocked. So it does happen naturally. But, one thing that different states do around the country in lakes and river sections, they'll stock tigers to control the population, to kind of see how they see how they interact with the other species in the body of water. So tigers are pretty cool. And, they get a little bit bigger they could get a little bit bigger than an average pike, but not quite the size of a big muskie. But they're a lot of fun when different states kind of put them in the bodies of water. And, of course, you get your occasional bass fishermen or pan fishermen. Oh, they're eating all my fish. And that's actually not the case. I've done a lot of research on that. They do cohabitate really well. And if anything, they kind of weed out the weak and make the other species even stronger.
I was going to ask you about that because I was fishing with a guy this past weekend here in Indiana I told him I was going to do a show on pike fishing on the Housatonic. He went, the Housatonic for pike? Yeah, that's a trout fishery. And I'm like, well, so how do pike and trout coexist? I'd think those pike would clean them out like in a week.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And the reason why I say it's a great question, because it's a conversation I've been having up here in Connecticut more and more with friends and different fly shops around that. Because there's a handful of sections that the state stocks trout and, classic trout water. From what I've read and from what some of the locals have told me, I guess there is a little bit of natural reproduction going on in the Housatonic with trout, but it's not a tailwater, meaning, it's not a bottom release dam, so it gets really hot in the summer.
Ah, okay.
And it's not dam controlled, meaning like it's just the flow is whatever Mother Nature gives us, which I would suggest for any of your audience, if they're thinking about hitting the Housatonic at a certain time of the year, you should always check flows and check conditions, because it could be really low or it could be really high based upon what Mother Nature gives us. But the pike have been spreading into the trout sections more and more over the last, I would say, probably 7 or 8 years, because trout fishermen that are throwing streamers for, bigger streamers for browns, let's say in the spring or in the fall, they're starting to hook some pike in the trout sections, but not in huge numbers. It's occasional, like once a month you hear a story, a guy come in a fly shop, I hooked a pike by accident. I didn't know they were in this section. So they are spreading out. But the thing with the Housatonic is the trout sections, they are mainly stocked by the state. So there's plenty of numbers. I don't think they, damage any of type of natural reproduction going on from what I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about pike a little bit. So as I was getting ready for the show, I've heard all these different nicknames for pike. So I was trying to find like a list of them. Here's a few that I found. See what you think of this. Water wolf, water gators, slough shark, esox, jackfish, longhead, and snot rocket. So what is it about pike that they've got all these nicknames? I mean, snot rocket, you have any idea where that came from?
Yeah, when you said that last, that's why I laughed out loud, because I've heard snot rocket before. They're fast, they're slimy, and I think that's probably where it came from. Okay. And there's a lot of fishermen that catch it. There's more of a bycatch, and they don't really know what it is, or they don't know how to handle it. So yeah, I think it's gotten some bad names.
Yeah, well, bad or good. I mean, if you're looking to catch a water wolf, something with a lot of teeth.
Yeah, I think water wolf's one of my favorite for pike and muskie. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. And then esox is just part of their Latin name, right?
Yeah. Esox lucius. Yep.
Okay. All right. So, take us into the mind of a pike for people that maybe haven't done a lot of pike fishing. So, what are their habits? Where do they hang out? What do they love? What do they hate? What do they tolerate? Give us a little bit of that inside info.
Yeah, you're totally open up in Pandora's box and going into the mind of Pogo, which is it's a really scary place to be.
Yeah.
Especially from the standpoint of I just, obsessed with pike and muskie. And when I got into it over 10 years ago, I kind of dropped every other species and just focused on these and gave my life to it over the last 10 years. And it drives me, it drove me nuts at first. So yeah, I'll start off, Stephen, by saying that, when I get clients that call me or people that want to go out or friends or family or what have you, they say, what's it like? And I'm like, well, we'll either catch 0 fish or we might catch 3. Like it's between 0 and 3. If we catch 4, if you get 4 or 5 pike in a day, you kind of won lotto. If you got 3 or 4 or 5 muskies in a day, you won lotto twice, because they're even harder to catch. But, the esox family, pike and muskie, and I kind of categorize them the same, because they are, it's like the pickerel, the pike, the muskie, little guy, medium guy, big guy, but they all kind of have that same mindset for the most part. And, they're meat eaters. They're totally nosy. They're temperamental. They don't go by any specific program. You could have all the conditions lined up. The flow is good. The water temperature is good. The time of the year, the moon phase, everything's in your favor, and you don't see a fish. And then all of a sudden you're out there 2 days later and you're like, holy, like this, there's a lot of fish activity going on right now. How did this just happen? So they have a mind of their own, and being the apex predator in the bodies of the water in which they inhabit, they don't have anything to be scared of, really. Maybe eagle, at the best. They'll come out and look at your fly, and all of a sudden, you're stripping, your fly's 20, 30 feet away, and here's a 40-inch or 50-inch fish just kind of like stalking behind it, like the water wolf that you described. And then all of a sudden it just disappears, and then you start your figure 8, and it comes out of nowhere and decides to eat it. So they're nosy, but they are a little territorial. They're savages. They're really just savages, and the way they eat and the way they act, it's pretty impressive. Like I said, a 40-inch pike is probably 15 plus years old, so it ate a lot of meat to get to that size. And they're snot rockets, like you said. They're just gnarly, snotty, but they're graceful. They're very, very graceful. You watch them, how they just attack your fly or stalk it, how they know how to, a 40-inch fish can just turn its body on a dime and grab your fly when you thought it was swimming away. So, yeah, the visual aspect of it is amazing. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, the way they behave is just, it's never the same either. If you're, and nothing against trout fishing, because I still trout fish, but you're nipping a body of water, or okay, I'm going to just drag it through this area and he's going to pull off and grab my fly, hopefully, where these guys don't really ever act the same twice. So it always keeps you on your toes.
Okay. And they're kind of like ambush lion weight predators, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly. And they, I don't know if you just mentioned it, but like how they think and where they go, but that's it.
Yeah.
So if there's, one thing, if you're fishing a body of water for the first time or the second time, you're trying to figure out where fish are in a river or even a lake, but let's focus on a river for a second. They're going to be around log jams. They're going to be around weed beds. They're going to look to ambush the, whatever they're going to eat. They could eat. I've caught 16, 18-inch smallmouth with gouges all over them. And I know that smallmouth somehow got away in the mouth of a pike or a muskie. So they're going to be around that type of environment because their food is around that type of environment. Like the sunfish in a lake or a river, or in the panfish and the smaller bass, they're going to be tucked in that stuff, hiding, because they know that the water wolf can probably get them. So those pike and muskie will be kind of hanging around those particular areas, looking for that food to make a mistake.
Or do they like current, or do they avoid current?
Yeah, so that's another can of worms. And pike and muskie are a little bit different, where muskies will, especially the Wisconsin strain muskies, they will hang in current like a trout, and they'll feed on walleye and different species. Where pike, what I've noticed is they will go in current, but it's not their favorite thing. I always found that pike are a little bit more adverse to sitting in current. So if you're fishing a moving body of water, you definitely look for back eddies, slower current, structure that's kind of obscuring the flow, so they can hang, they kind of draft behind it. So I kind of focus on, when there's a good flow going, I focus on the banks where I can find back eddies and slower bodies, sections of water where they can kind of hang out, where there might be some cover around there.
I got you. Oh, that's great. That's a great tip. And how much does weather affect the fishing?
Yeah, so not as much as you would think. Water temperature is probably the most important. Would water temperature be kind of considered in the weather category?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah. So I guess this goes for any species, and that you're fishing in any body of water. I think water temperature stability is key. So like right now here in Connecticut, the water temperature went from 74 degrees 12 days ago to 61 degrees. So there's a 13-degree drop in the last 12 days. So when it started dropping and I was on the water, the fishing it picked up. You can see the pike were getting more active. We were seeing more pikes and bigger pike. And then it kind of dumped. The water temperature just dumped because we had like 3 nights in the mid 30s. And then the fishing got slow for a couple days. We caught a few fish, but it was kind of slow. And then here, the last 2 days, the air temperature really stabilized. It kind of got a little bit brighter and sunnier and warmer during the day. And then, I was out there last night with a guy, and we really had we were out there for about 5 hours, and we had a bunch of smallmouth and a handful of pike. So it just goes to show me, every time I kind of experience this water temperature game, is stability. So I find that no matter what time of the year it is, there's obviously barometric pressure conversations that we could have for probably an hour of how that affects fish. But generally speaking, I kind of focus on water temperature stability to kind of anticipate how that day or week is going to go.
Okay. So you want it consistent. So if it drops a little bit, that's okay, or goes up a little bit, but not like these big 10, 15-degree drops. That's not going to be good.
Yeah, it's just, I had a thought about that. So what I wanted to share with the audience and yourself is, so we catch pike all year round here, every single month of the year.
Oh, you do? Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. Obviously, it all depends on how bad of a winter we have. And the reason why I mentioned that is, like, this past year, we had a very mild winter. The water temperature, we were catching pike at 34-degree water temperature, but it was staying at 34 degrees for a bit of time. It didn't fluctuate too much. It was just kind of staying at 34 degrees. So that temperature was extremely stable. And that's why we were able to catch fish. So if that water temperature went down to 32 degrees and got icy and slushy, probably wouldn't have been as good.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And yeah, so barometric pressure, that's important, huh?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of just it's more of a passion in studying and seeing, because I kind of have like the scientific mind sometimes, is seeing how the barometric pressure affects fish. I bought this really cool apparatus that does water temperature, does barometric pressure, and I try to pay attention to that to see how the fish are acting and those different swings or the consistency. And I believe there is something to it, and I've seen it, with my own experience and kind of documenting these things on my iPhone with photos and kind of taking some notes over a week period. Okay, this was the moon phase, this was barometric pressure, this is the water temperature stability. Not that I have like a huge notebook or Excel spreadsheets, but I've just really tried to kind of keep an eye on how that works, because with pike and muskie, like muskie, they say it's a fish of 10,000 casts. So anything that we can put in our favor to help land one of these fish of a lifetime, I try to apply that to my clients and my friends and people that I fish with.
Sure. So can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned about that? Like what is there a secret there, a secret sauce in terms of pressure and water temps?
Yeah. So I would say that with pike and muskie, water temperatures between 42, my favorite is 42 to 60 degree water temperatures, a stable barometric pressure, meaning that there's not like high pressures coming and low pressure systems coming in and out throughout the course of a couple of days. It's pretty stable. And then anything around the new moon and the full moon. So if you could do the new moon, full moon, good stability in water temperature, good stability in barometric pressure, and those water temperatures, that seems to be the most consistent. But again, these fish will surprise the shit out of you, and you might catch, fish of a lifetime in the most random time. But I would say if you're a gambling man, those three things you try to think of.
Yeah. Normally speaking. Yeah. No, that's great to hear. Yeah. Good. So what does a pike eat? I mean, you talked about, mostly meat and other game fish. I guess maybe what doesn't a pike eat, right? I mean, they're pretty much keen in on anything that moves, right? Small ducks, maybe. What else?
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of pike and muskie caught over the years that, died for some reason, or they couldn't release them properly, or I don't know, maybe even people keep them sometimes. I'm big on catch and release, but yeah, they've taken ducks out of muskies and pike's mouths. Yeah. Or their bellies. I'm sorry.
Wow.
So yeah, that's totally a thing. It's what they don't eat. And there's been photos taken. You can search the internet of, a pike or muskie choking on a meal that's too big. And they bite off too much and they end up choking. So yeah, I don't think there's anything that they won't try.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're pretty much fishing streamers for them. Like they're imitating other fish, essentially, correct?
Yeah, exactly. If you actually on my YouTube channel, if you go to one, I think I have like a really quick 30-second or a minute video of a couple flies in one of those aquariums you buy from like Cabela's that kind of, show off your flies that create current in there. Yeah. So our streamers, are anywhere from 6 inches. I kind of start my streamers for pike around 6 inches, and I've even caught, a 30-inch pike on a 14-inch streamer. So, but yeah, I would say between 6 inches and 18 inches are kind of the range of what you'd want to throw for pike and muskie. And obviously, you have to match up the right weight rod for that. But yeah, there's all different equations to that. Yep.
Okay. Great. Yeah, we'll jump into that stuff in a minute. But tell us a little bit about your background, Pogo. Like, how'd you end up, guiding on the Housatonic? We got a little bit of that story earlier, but you started in the corporate world, correct?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. I graduated college and got in the corporate world and, just fished since I could walk. My dad was an outdoorsman and he just always took me fishing and got me into it. And I was just very, very passionate as a young child. And one of my goals in life was to be Bill Dance when I was like 10 years old.
That's great.
Yeah. So I loved largemouth bass fishing. And then I just, always fished but always had a corporate job, and I was in sales. So I had a corporate sales job where I was able to have some, I was able to play hooky from time to time and get out and fish probably more than the average person who had to go to an office every day. And I just really got addicted to it. I was out in San Diego for a while working for GE, and I ended up back in Connecticut in 2009. And that's when I first started fly fishing, and I got introduced to fly fishing, steelhead fishing in upstate New York. And that was just a huge passion. Yeah. And then I started fishing for trout here on the Housatonic. I hired a couple guides, and a gentleman by the name of Adam Francischini, who actually is like a pretty good guide. He guides all year round, all over the world. And I was lucky enough to find Adam, and he taught me the ways of trout here on the Housy. And then I got into, I went to a smallmouth section that I thought I was just going to focus on smallmouth because I, just grew up fishing for largemouth. And I was like, oh, there's smallmouth on this river. And that's when I had my first pike experience that I was talking about earlier in our conversation.
Yeah.
And then ever since then, I just went, head first into the pike and muskie thing. But I did grow up here in central Connecticut. And then when I moved back from San Diego, I wanted to be around like some really good fishing in Connecticut. And I still wanted to be close to my parents. They were getting up there in age. So I'm, about 45 minutes from them. And I picked the Northwest corner, which is, if any of your audience knows Vermont, or a lot of people have been to Vermont, I would say Northwest Connecticut is, I call it Little Vermont. It's very, very hilly, mountainous, beautiful country, a lot of lakes. It's not a lot of population. It's pretty remote. For Connecticut, it's pretty remote. So, and then I didn't really realize I was going to guide. And then I started fishing for pike on a very regular basis. I knew a lot of local fly fishing guys. And then I bought my first drift boat. And then when I started, learning how to row, I started basically whenever you're the first one out of a group of friends that buys a drift boat, you become a guide by accident. Because now you have you have a lot more friends.
Yeah, let's call Pogo.
Yeah. He just bought a boat and he knows how to row. Let's go with him.
Yeah, he's my best friend now.
Yeah, exactly. So then I just started guiding friends, and not really guiding, just fishing with friends and then teaching them how to row so we could both fish. And then one of the local guys said to me, said, Pogo, why don't you start guiding for these things? I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. And, so I didn't really advertise. It was just kind of word of mouth. And then I was very part-time because I was in the corporate world. And then after, it was 2 years ago, I went full-time, or 2 or 3 years ago now, I went full-time on the pike and muskie thing. And it just kind of evolved. I always said I would never do this full-time.
Here you are.
Yeah. And not necessarily I do it full time. I have my fiance. I have another business, but I do it. I would guess 3/4 of the time. So I have a little life balance with another business and guiding. Because it just became a huge passion to teach, and that's why I kind of did my YouTube thing and all the how tos on my PogoPike YouTube channel. Because I love teaching and I just love putting smiles on people's faces, and you just make the best of friends out there on the water.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And your YouTube channel is really nice.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, great job on that. And I watched the one video called "For the Love of Fishing: What Ties Us Together." How did that video come about?
Yeah. Got it. Yeah. So you watched that. That's awesome. It's kind of funny. It's so, over the years, in the last five years, social media really became kind of a big deal in the fishing world. And I love it. And I'm obviously a big advocate of Instagram and Facebook, and, my Instagram's PogoPike if anybody wants to check me out. But, I just really saw the growth of the sport with every species of fish. But I always said I'm a passionate person, and as you guys can tell, and I just knew that what the real secret sauce here, the real trophy was in the, the sport of fishing, and specifically fly fishing, just the relationships that you forge and the people you meet, and the way you become friends. I mean, you fish with somebody for a weekend that you just met, and you just have so much in common, and you become great friends over time, and you help each other in life outside of fishing. So I just want to put a message out to the world for those who do have time to watch, For the Love of Fishing on my YouTube channel. The aspect that, the real trophy is the relationships, the people, and then even guiding. I don't really, yes, you get paid for the day, but my biggest reward in guiding is, high-fiving that guy or gal who got their first pike on the fly or their first muskie on the fly and changing their life a little bit, because it happened to me when I first got into it. Someone changed my life.
Right.
And I just wanted to kind of share that with the fishing community to say, hey, guys, don't lose sight of this. Like, it's all the grip and grin on social media is awesome, and we're all about that. But the special thing here is the people, and the people that you meet, and the relationships that you forge.
That's great. What a great way to measure success from a day on the river or a week with guiding a client. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just uplifting each other in everyday life. It's part of it.
Got to be a rewarding career here. Well, hey, let's dive into some of the details on how you approach the Housatonic. So can you walk us through the seasons? You said it's a all year round fishery for pike. Like, what are you doing, maybe this time of year, and then as you head into winter, how do you change your techniques, spring, summer, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and then going back to the old water temperature conversation. So, as the water temperature gets colder, you just slow down your presentation. You slow down your stripping. So if that water temperature is sub 42 degrees, let's say, you just want to strip a little slower. If the warmer it gets, the faster you can go. But, I always start off by explaining, starting with like the fall, summer, everything's hot, warm, the fish slow down tremendously. In the fall, just like any other species, trying to beef up for the winter because they know winter is coming. So, fall is one of my favorite times of year, both from a weather standpoint, because I like sweatshirt weather. Huh. But the fish, the pike and muskie really start to move and they get a lot more aggressive where, a trophy fish other times of the year might only need to eat, once or twice a week, let's say, or 3 times a week. But in the fall, they really start to eat more regularly. And then you have shorter daylight hours. So during those daylight hours, they're feeding more. So you're kind of putting things in your favor a bit. So yeah, and then as the winter approaches, you just, as long as it's not iced up and as long as you or your friends or your clients are opposed to, really bundling up and being out there, with 40-degree air temperature and 35-degree water temperature, you just fish a little slower. And then there are times, obviously, here in Connecticut where it just shuts off because it ices up. Even the river gets icy.
Sure.
And you're not fishing. Yep. And then that leads into the spring, which is, there's a pre-spawn and the post-spawn, both great times to fish for esox. Pre-spawn and post-spawn they're very active. During the spawn, I try not to target them at all. I try to stay away from them for, about 2 or 3 weeks. And that usually, it depends on what part of the country you're in, but here in Connecticut, the spawn kind of happens at about, 45, 48 degree water temperature in the spring. And then when they're done spawning let's say late April, early May here in Northwest corner, they get really active and they start really feeding. And they start out skinny and then you catch some fish a week later and you notice they're a little fatter. And then 2 weeks later, they're kind of chunky. And then, June that kind of leads into June. June's a great month all around up here for smallmouth and Northern Pike. And then you get into early July. So early July, once that water temperature goes over 75 degrees, 74 degrees, I stop guiding or fishing for pike. It gets kind of dangerous for them. That water temperature starts to heat up. So I kind of always look at July and August as off season for pike and muskie, depending on what part of the country you're in. But here, I kind of looked at as an off season, and then like I said, early September, right around Labor Day, when those water temperatures start to drop back into the low 70s, high 60s, it starts to get really good again. So I hope that helps. That's kind of a long-winded, quick version of the seasons.
You did say earlier something about carp. Can you fish for carp in those hot months, or?
Yeah, so carp is one of my kind of secret obsessions over the last 5 years. When I ever have free time, I'll go out there with myself or some friends and we'll try to catch some carp on the fly. But the Housatonic River, all the way from northern Massachusetts all the way down to Long Island Sound, has some amazing big carp, good carp fishing. And, some of the trout sections, in Kent, Connecticut, which is it's not too far from where I am. There's some really good trout water in Kent, Connecticut that does have public access. You just got to kind of drive along the river and look for pull-offs where you can access the river. But once that lower flow starts to happen in late June, when the water gets lower and clearer, you can see the schools of carp kind of mulling around and feeding. And if you can sight fish for them, and 10-foot leader, woolly bugger, some type of stone fly, you get it in front of them and hope they pick it up. And if they do, God bless you, because it's game on.
Is that right? Woolly buggers and stoneflies, huh?
Yeah, so I caught them on glow bugs. I just grabbed some glow bugs I had for steelhead, and they're this looks like a berry. So I know there's I'm a novice carp on the fly guy compared to some of the people in the country that are really good at it and tie, really epic flies and have a whole different way of doing things. I'm kind of a generalist with it, but yeah, so that's been my approach.
Okay, that's great. All right, so back to pike here for a minute. So what's your setup in terms of rods, line, leaders, flies, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so my pike rod started, I have my 8-weight is the go-to pike rod. And, depending on how deep of water that you're fishing, I typically put, 250 or 300 grain on a thinking line on my 8 weights.
Okay.
And then, my leader system, I actually have on my YouTube channel, I have like a 10-minute video. It's a step-by-step ESOX leader. If any of your audience wants to check that out, if they miss anything that I say here. But yeah, I just use like a 40-pound butt section of like 2 feet. And then I use a barrel swivel, like a micro Spro barrel swivel, 80 pound. And then I use another 2 feet of 30 pound and all fluoro, and 30 pound of fluoro. And then I use a mono non-slip loop knot at the end of that second section. And then it makes a circle about the size of a $50. And the reason why I do that is I put bite guards on all my flies beforehand. So I personally like 80 pound Quattro high seas, it's called. And again, this is on my YouTube channel video. And it's the most dense bite guard that I found that's fluoro, or 80 pound. And then I just tie about 8 to 10 inch of bite guard on all my flies with a perfection loop at the end. So then I just loop to loop the flies to my leader system. So I'm not changing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it's a pretty slick way. One of the $1 million questions I get all the time: why do you use a barrel swivel on your leader system? Doesn't that mess up your guides? And I find that it doesn't mess up my guides, but I use a barrel swivel because just it helps take the twist out of the fly line, because you're casting these big deer hair hackled flies that are constantly
and they'll spin, won't they? Yeah.
Yeah. So I find that saves your fly line a lot.
Okay. And a bite guard, basically, instead of a steel leader, you've got this really thick fluoro mono.
Exactly.
Right up to your fly. Okay.
And a lot of guys use steel. A lot of guys use steel leaders, and they swear by them. I'm not against them. I don't ever say they don't work. I'm just a little more of a purist. I like the fluoro.
Okay. So when do you jump up to, because I know on your YouTube channel, you're talking about 9, 10, even 12 weight rods. Like, when would you jump up to a bigger weight rod? Does it have to do with the size of fish you're chasing, or is it more like the size of the fly you're casting? What is it?
Yeah, it's more the size of the fly, because you obviously, on an 8 weight, you probably don't want to go more than an 8-inch bucktail or a streamer. But if you want to throw a 14-incher, you might need a 10, 11, or 12 weight. So it really just depends on the size fly. And obviously with muskie, because they're bigger, we're throwing on average 12-inch or bigger flies. So that's where the 10, 11, 12 weight comes into play. Yeah, so it's not really more so fighting the fish. But one thing I will say, Stephen, I've learned over the years is that when I first got into this, I was like, oh, bigger the better, bigger the better. And I was, casting these monster flies on 9 and 10 weights. And I got to the point where one year I got tennis elbow. I couldn't barely hold a cup of coffee for like two months. But then as I started guiding, I realized not everybody can throw a 9, 10, or 11 weight, even muskie fishing. So I kind of narrowed it down to these specific 8 weights that I found. And like, for example, my fiance, Kate, she caught her first muskie on the fly this past fall out in Wisconsin. She got 3 muskies in a week, and they were all on an 8 weight on about an 8-inch fly. So if, with muskies, you can certainly catch a 40-inch, 50-inch muskie it might be a little tougher to land them, but you can do it on an 8 weight, but you'll be able to cast all day and not kind of burn yourself out.
Okay. Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, I was just throwing a 7 weight rod this last weekend for smallmouth, and yeah, I didn't get tired throwing the thing, but the guy was telling me that it's really more for the size of the flies than the fish. So, and it's important to match all that up too, right? And at the end of the day, you want to get that fish in fairly quickly, right? So you're not tiring it out, especially if the water's a little warmer.
Yeah, exactly. And the one thing I will say is that with pike and muskie, for your audience, and I hate to keep on saying this, but because there's so much to go into and we don't have the time, but on my YouTube channel, I have a video that goes through the fly rods and the fly lines and all the different weights and why. And I show them in my video. And for example, this gentleman, Tom Shank, out in northern Wisconsin, his name of his company is called Chippewa River Rods, or Chippewa River Custom Rods. And he makes this really cool one piece. It's an 8 weight. He makes an 8 weight, a 10 weight, and a 12 weight. It's a one piece, which is not great for traveling, but for guiding, it's great. And for people that have local waters where they don't have to get on a plane. But that one piece really, I find, really does the trick with kind of bombing these bigger flies all day versus, I just had a client 3 days ago. We're going out in a couple of weeks. He called me and said, I'm buying this $800 rod. I'm like, don't buy the $800 rod. He's like, why? I'm like, because it's too brittle. It's a great rod. It's a great rod. But for this application, because you're bringing in the leader into the rod as you're figure eighting. You only have a foot and a half of line off your rod tip. So you're really beating up an $800 expensive rod, and it's brittle. Like the high-end rods that they're making these days are pretty brittle. So I found that you don't need to go with the big brand names for this specific sport. You can go with custom rods like Tommy Shanks rods, or you can go with, there's a handful of other companies out there that make a little bit more of a durable rod, so to speak. And I find, because I've snapped so many rods over the years when I first got started, very expensive rods, and just kept on breaking them. Like, what's going on? And I talked to some rod makers, and they're like, yeah, they're just not made for what you're doing. And I'm like, okay, well, that helps. It's not just me then.
So you're breaking them off on fish?
No, just you're in the middle of a cast and like a section just snaps, Yeah.
Yeah, I've had that happen. Yeah, you just don't know why exactly, but your rod just broke in half for some reason.
Yeah.
All right, so talk about some of the techniques that are specific to, pike fishing. Like I know the figure eight is really important. Talk about some of those things.
Number one, strip set. If you don't strip set, you're going to lose 95% of the fish that eat your fly. You have to strip set, and the first technique I teach anybody who's new in my boat, chasing these stocks for the first time, is that I get up in my boat and I make a cast and I show them firsthand how I do it and why, and explain why. So you always point your fly rod at the fly. So if you're just off by 5-10 degrees on an angle, and that fly is, let's say, a little bit off to your right, and a fish eats, your natural reaction is to trout. We call it trout setting, or like just, lifting the rod and trying to set the hook. Well, what's going to happen is you don't have like a 16 midge hook into a soft trout's mouth. You have a 2-aught or 4-aught big saltwater kind of hook that you're trying to put in a bony fish's mouth. So you need all the power that you can get to get that hook to penetrate. So you always point your rod tip at the fly as you're stripping, and you're kind of like in that shortstop catcher ready stance, because when that fish eats, you need to strip set at least twice, just two good, like a tug of war, like just strip. And then once you feel those head shakes, or that you've got them, then you can obviously slowly lift the rod. But those are the two biggest things I tell anybody that ever wants to know about pike or muskie on the fly is you have to point your rod at the fly and you have to strip set. The minute that you lift, if you catch a pike or muskie and you lift the rod, you trout set, and you actually landed that fish, you got extremely lucky. And doing this for 10 years and seeing it over and over, and I did it. It took me 2 years to stop lifting the rod. But it's a hard habit to break, right? Because we trout fish or we topwater fish for smallmouth, or we top everything. You lift the rod, you lift the rod, you lift the rod. So in this, you really have to strip set and keep that rod pointed at the fly. Those are the two, and then obviously the figure eight, but those are the two biggest things that I would say if anybody can take away in order to, because you might get one shot all day on a big fish. You might get one shot all in 3 days muskie fishing on a big fish. And I've seen it and I've done it. You lift the rod, and there goes your fish of the trip.
They're off. Oh my gosh.
Swims away. Yeah.
So talk about figure eighting. Like, I was watching some videos on your channel, and you're jamming the rod down in the water, right? You're not just kind of doing a figure eight on the surface. It's down in the water.
Yeah. The deeper, the better. You want to be able to see your fly, but the deeper, the better. And the reason is these fish have, their eyes are kind of more situated on top of their head. So they kind of hunt looking up a little bit. They'll come from underneath. So by going deeper, you're keeping the boat and your profile out of the equation so that you don't spook them. And I've seen them not get spooked many times, but I also see them get spooked. So you're trying to keep your profile and the boat out of the equation. So the deeper, the better. But as long as you can see your fly, because if you can't see your fly and a fish grabs it, you're going to think you just snagged something. You're like, oh, what's that? And you're not going to really jam them. You want to be able to at least see him eat the fly, which is actually, that's like the cherry on top. Yeah, that's like the cherry on top experience. And I'll tell you a quick story about Kate. Caught her biggest muskie last year on a figure eight on her birthday. So I'll tell you that story in a second. But so, it's all about digging that fly in a circular figure eight motion. And what happens is they'll come in and they're hunting, right? So your fly is coming straight at you. And then they'll be chasing it or just like stalking it, and you might not even see them. And then when you start your figure eight, now it's like this cat and mouse game. Now you're getting that fish excited. And he's like, oh, okay, this is trying to get away from me. I got to grab this. I got to grab this. And then they usually attack on one of the turns. But I always say the figure eight it's part of the cast, because watching literally 50% of the pike and muskie that have been landed in my boat, I've landed a lot of them personally in guiding over the years. When you see 50% of the fish caught that way, you'll never not figure eight again.
So every time you cast, you bring it in and you figure eight. Is that right?
When I personally fish, I figure eight twice, even if I don't see a fish. And my clients, I would tell them at least figure eight, one full figure eight. Yeah. Because when you see what I've seen over the last 10 years, you would know why and why. And it's part of the cast. And I always tell people, like, you're casting this big fly all day. It's kind of a break on your arm. Like, your fly's in the water, you're figure eighting. I've seen 50% of the fish come from a figure eight. So it's part of the cast, and you're kind of just, working it, and just, it's like I keep on saying, it's part of the cast. So, and it works. So just keep on doing it. And it also gives yourself a break from just casting and casting and casting. So, do you mind me to tell you a quick story about Kate?
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay. So we were out in Wisconsin last year, and last year was the first year that Kate started fly fishing for pike and muskie. And, she caught a handful of pike here in Connecticut on the fly last year, last spring and summer. Or spring and fall. She was totally stoked. And then she came out to Wisconsin, and she, obviously wanted to get her first muskie on the fly. It's a big deal, right? So the first 2 days that we fished with a mutual friend, we did not see a muskie for 2 days. So, and my girlfriend's a very stubborn, strong-willed person, which is why I love her. So the third day, we're fishing. She finally gets her first muskie on the fly, not on a figure eight, but it was, it was a nice little muskie. It was probably like 32, 33 inches. And obviously it was a big celebration for everybody in the boat. Then it was the next day, or no, it was 2 days later, was her birthday. It was October 20th last year. And, all she said for the day before, the night before, the day of was, I just want to I want to get a muskie on a figure eight. She's like, that's what I want for my birthday. So we went out that morning, myself, her, and a mutual friend, and we went to a really good section of the river, and I'm obviously rowing. And Kate is, I find that women, when you get them in the boat, for some reason, you teach them these techniques, they pay attention more. And they do it.
Is that right? Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they do what you suggest. And she was practicing her figure eight out in Wisconsin for the first 3 days. Like, she was really doing it every single time. And she was doing it to the T almost, and kind of trying to perfect it. And she was telling me the night before, we were having a burger and a beer, and she's like, I'm really focused on this figure eight. And I'm like, I see what you're doing. I'm like, it's fantastic. So we're fishing for about an hour and a half that morning on her birthday. It was a beautiful fall day out in Wisconsin. And I'm rowing the boat. So she's in front of me, in the front of the boat going down river. And she's over there, and I watching her figure eight. And all of a sudden, Stephen, this big muskie just rolls on her fly, but misses it. Like, doesn't take the fly. You just see this huge boil. And she's like, holy, there's a muskie. I'm like, don't stop figure eight. She's like, I know what to do. And then she figure eight again. And then the second figure eight, this muskie did the same thing, rolled over the fly, but never ate it. And I could tell it was a big fish just by the boil. And I saw its back for a second. And then she came around for the third figure eight, and this muskie just grabbed it. And she set the hook like a champ professional, like just had it pinned. And she had it on for like maybe 3 seconds. She's like, get the net. I'm like, I am. Hold on a second. Like,
your first fight.
Yeah, she didn't want to lose the fish. So I'm grabbing the net. We get the fish in the net, and she just you probably heard her all in Indiana. She screamed at the top of her lungs with just pure joy and excitement.
That's great. What a woman.
Yeah. And that's the power of the figure eight. She pulled that fly out of the water prematurely and just wanted to make that next cast, so to speak. Would have never caught her muskie of a lifetime on a figure eight on her birthday.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's fantastic. And, so I got to believe that catching a pike or a muskie on a figure eight, when that fish is right there at the end, like you said, only like a foot and a half of leaders hanging out at the end of your rod, and they're hitting it right then. You don't really need to strip set then, do you?
Not really. You kind of you just really want to just make sure they have it, because sometimes you get really jacked up and you pull it out of their mouth prematurely, but you just want to make sure they have it, and then try to set the hook towards their tail. You don't want to go with their body because you could pull it out of their mouth. You kind of want to just make sure they got it and then just jam them as hard as you can. I mean, literally try to break the rod and just, go towards their midsection of their tail. Yep.
Yeah. And then a pike, usually when you hook a pike like that close to the boat, like what's its reaction? Is it just a screaming run? Does it go deep? What's it do?
It's usually like this big, ginormous head shake. So like their body kind of just goes, it just turns side to side, and they usually open their mouth and just head shake, like what just happened? That's usually what happens. And that's why when you figure eight, the deeper you go, the better, because if they eat on the surface and then that fly is out of the water and that his mouth is out of the water, a lot of bad things could happen. I mean, he'll shake you loose. So that's why deeper on the figure eight helps. But yeah, usually their reaction is just like this big torquing motion with their mouth open. Very rarely do a really big fish, I've seen it a few times, will just kind of try to swim away from you as fast as they can, or as strong as they can, I could say. But a lot of times it's like this just ginormous gyration head shake that's just like with gill flares, and you're like, oh my God, that's nuts. That's the coolest thing I ever saw. Yeah.
Yeah, and like a big pike or a muskie, is that like a 5-minute fight, or can you get them in pretty quickly and get them off the fly?
It's usually within a couple minutes. I would say the average fight for a pike or muskie is anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And the bigger the pike or the bigger the muskie, they're just stronger. So it just takes a little more finesse. But every once in a while, though, you will get a pike or muskie that just takes off like a saltwater fish for 10 yards. But usually it's just a battle of trying to keep that fish under control without pulling too hard or giving him too much slack. So that's why I always call it, it's more of a wrangle than fighting a fish. You're more like trying to wrangle a bull or something.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Well, that's great. And I wanted to ask you about your speaking gigs too. So you do some speaking for different fishing clubs and for TU, right?
Yeah. Yep. I've been doing those for about 3 or 4 years now, and I really enjoy it. I have an hour presentation that I do that's specifically around pike and muskie on the fly. And I've gotten some good feedback just from the standpoint of a lot of people have never, seen a presentation that in depth around that specific species, because not a lot of people pike or muskie fish on the fly. There's not a lot of us. I mean, it's growing. The sport's definitely growing in leaps and bounds. But when you do it for the TU chapters or different fly fishing clubs, it's usually a big hit. Because I have a lot of good photos. I also use videos in my presentation. So because a picture says 1,000 words, right? So I try to incorporate some video and some photos into my presentation, and I really truly enjoy teaching.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, that's fantastic. Well, here we are at the top of the hour, Pogo. Thank you so much for being on the show. Great job. And how can our listeners get in touch with you if they want to inquire about maybe your speaking or, book you for a guide?
Yeah. So PogoPike.com, really easy to remember. Instagram, PogoPike. And then if you go to my YouTube channel, go to YouTube, just type in PogoPike. Anybody who's listening, if you can give me a subscribe on PogoPike on my YouTube channel, that'd be awesome. So those are the easiest ways. All my contact information is on my website. And I do want to say, Stephen, thanks for having me. I've listened to a handful of your episodes since we first met, and you asked me to be on. And I just love what you're doing and the message that you're spreading and just making the community come together. So it's really cool. I want to thank you. It's been an honor to be on.
Yeah, you bet. And hey, we'll put some pictures of some of the flies that Pogo, you tie a lot of your own flies. There's a video on your YouTube channel about that. We'll put some of those pictures out on our Destination Angler Facebook page, and some links to like your YouTube channel and how to get in touch with you. Yeah, we'll put all that out there. So yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. And thanks so much for being on the podcast, Pogo. I wish you the best of success in your guided adventures. Folks, remember to tip your guides on how hard they work and how friendly and knowledgeable they are, not how many fish you catch. You can email me with comments and suggestions at shaigh50@gmail.com. That's shaigh50@gmail. Please give us a share, like, or follow on Facebook or Instagram, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Hey, and we rely on anglers like you to spread the word, so please tell your buddies. As always, our music is by A Brothers Fountain. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again next week.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.